goes. All right, everybody. Hello and welcome back to In Liberty and Health. And today it's been like a year and a half, and it doesn't feel like it's been that long. Although, if you live in the United States, I swear it's just like day after day after day. It goes by very fast. Now, being a new father, which Carl and I were just talking about off air, it really goes by fast. So, anyways, Carl, welcome back, and I'm so glad to have you. There's been a lot going on in the world. But first things first, how are you?
Thank you, Kyle. And as a new father myself, my advice: enjoy it while you can. We just have our second baby. Our second baby is a little bit older than yours, but yeah, this is the most precious time. Like pretty soon they'll be able to talk back. Like my first son.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. My one coworker said, like, "Oh, this stage of having a kid is great, but when they could start like forming their own thoughts and stuff, that's when it goes downhill." So,
Yeah.
speaking of kind of talking back and stuff like that, some interesting stuff happened over in your neck of the woods. Speaking of, East Asia and China and that, and I'm surprised I didn't see more like hawkish people in China and the United States talking about it, like anyone in the Trump administration. They seem to go under the radar for people who don't kind of observe this stuff as closely as you and I did. But I really wanted to start off with Chang Li-Wun, the chairwoman of the Kuomintang, had went over as the first, like party member of a serious political party in Taiwan, having communications with, Xi Jinping, for the first time in what was it, 10 years? I'm
10
just
years,
curious
yeah.
your thoughts on that, and what do you think this means? Do you think this is a big deal? Like, just feel free to start where you want.
Yeah, this is definitely a big deal. The last time the head of KMT, which is the main opposition party on Taiwan, the last time the head of KMT went to mainland China, that was 2015. That's more than 10 years ago. And a lot has changed, obviously, in the last 10 years. One thing is the ruling party on Taiwan, DPP, is now deeply unpopular. They have been in power for a long time, for over a decade, and people are getting fed up. And the current sitting president, Lai Ching-te, was only elected with 40% of the vote.
Can I
The only
can I
Go ahead.
interrupt you here? I'm so sorry, but I talked about my friend Nico with this, but I was looking at the betting markets, and the reason why I wanted to interrupt here is because I wanted to have you explain this a little bit more. The betting markets have Lai Ching-te winning the 2028 election with, I think it was like 80%, but the Kuomintang has like a 40% chance of winning the midterms. So I take these betting markets with a grain of salt, but I wanted to make sure I kind of get this in here, and I want you to work that into your explanation as you're going. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really wanted to get
Yeah,
a little bit of
yeah.
that out of you.
So to break it down to the basics for people like who are not conversant in Taiwan politics, Taiwan used to be a two-party system, KMT, DPP, just like United States. But in more recent years, now there's a third party, TPP, which made things interesting. But it also means opposition to DPP is now split. It's split two ways. And this is why over the last presidential election, Lai Ching-te was able to win with only 40% of the vote, because there were three candidates and the opposition was split two ways. So it was like 40, 30 something, 30 something, 20 something. And so this is, I think people who are counting on Lai Ching-te to win 2028 is counting on this opposition to remain split between KMT and TPP. Now, this is what we need to watch is a coming election in November, because Taiwan has the same election cycle as the United States, right? Yeah. So they also have midterm election in November, and this is another election for the opposition to lose, because people are just sick and tired of DPP. But the problem is the problem of coordination among the opposition. If KMT and TPP can somehow work together, they will be able to take more seats than they have currently, because this is like really local politics. But for example, in southern Taiwan, where used to be a DPP stronghold, but TPP is a strong challenger. Like KMT can say, okay, we will withdraw our candidate from the race. So
Mhm.
all the opposition to DPP now can go vote for the TPP party. Whereas in the other parts of Taiwan, TPP could do the same thing for the KMT. Say, okay, we'll take our candidate out of this race. Now you'll be a two-way race between KMT and DPP. That way we'll make sure DPP will be defeated. If they're able to do that, there is a great chance of a landslide defeat for DPP. The question, of course, rests on the coordination, whether that will happen or not. That did not happen during the last presidential election. This is something remain to be seen, because the Taiwan politics you always throw curveball at you. You never know what to expect. But the fact is that the DPP, the current DPP head, Lai Ching-te, was never really popular. I mean, he was voted in with 40% of the votes, right. and now he's even less popular. Because Taiwan faced a lot of the same problems more advanced economies like United States faces, which is economic stagnation. The youth have diminished economic prospects. Housing prices too high, way too high. They can't afford it. I remember there was a famous a Taiwanese now he's a former Taiwanese independent supporter. Back then, a few years ago, he was still a Taiwanese independent supporter. He's known as Gem Boss, Guan Zhang. He used to. I remember there was a famous rant. He said, "Look, if the communists were come to this island, they will have to fight us. We'll fight them on the street, because right now we the freedom of speech is the last thing we have on this island. We can't afford to buy houses. We don't have good job prospect. If you take away our right to BS online, we will fight you tooth and nail." After that rant, I'm like, dude, this guy is so close. This guy is so close. And then, like half a year later, he flipped. Now he's touring mainland China. He's saying, there's no reason for brothers to fight against brothers, and he turned against the current administration. So there is a tectonic plate shift in Taiwan, because people are ready for something new, rather than this old tired confrontation with mainland to dominate every facet of their life. They just want to move on and concentrate on how to get their kids educated, how to get better health services, and how to get better jobs. Just like everybody else in the world. And this is where this is why if KMT and TPP, the two opposition party, can get their act together, they have a real chance at a sweeping victory this November. And this is also why the current head of the KMT to visit mainland China at this particular juncture and meeting with Xi Jinping in a high-profile visit is a big deal. Because she actually openly said, like, if you love Taiwan, you would not want Taiwan to be turned into a battlefield. Just look at what happened to Ukraine. We do not want to be Ukraine of East Asia, right? Let's have a dialogue. Let's have dialogue across the Taiwan Strait, so to make sure to minimize the risk of conflict. I mean, that's very easy logic, and this is why she was very well received on mainland China on this trip, which will help her because she is scheduled to visit United States. And now the American official have to be nice to her, because she is saying, hey, we have options, if you're mean to us, we'll just turn to mainland China. So I think that's politically savvy on her part, because ultimately the Taiwan issue is really not a issue between Taiwan and mainland China per se. It's really a U.S.-China issue. It has been since 1949 or 1950, when President Truman authorized Seventh Fleet to sail into the Taiwan Strait to prevent the crossing. The political situation today is a legacy of that. Is a legacy of that decision in July 1950 as a result of the Korean War, when Truman says, "Oh, okay, we can't we can't let communist China take over Taiwan. That was before the Chinese entry into the Korean War, by the way, because at that time Mao had about 500,000 troops on the waiting to cross the Taiwan Strait. And then when Seventh Fleet sailed to the Taiwan Strait, Mao said, okay, take those 500,000 troops, move them north, we'll send them to Korea. And China entered into the Korean War on October that year. So 3 months after the U.S. Seventh Fleet entered the Taiwan Strait. So this is all connected. But this is a real chance for a conciliation, and at least, unification is probably too early, but at least for peace to break out, which is, I think, for both sides of the Taiwan Strait, none of the people are really interested to see a actual war. If a war is to break out, it's going to be cities on both sides of the Taiwan Strait, and I would say, and cities all around East Asia, that's going to be devastated. Just look at what's going on in West Asia right now, right? I mean, the whole idea, the premise of U.S. empire system in whether East Asia or whether East or West Asia is that U.S. alliance with the United States is supposed to provide you with a security shield to protect you.
Yeah, how'd that work out?
That's not what happened. By hosting U.S. bases is making you a target. But that actually is understood by the Pentagon, from get-go. The whole purpose of the U.S. bases in Okinawa, in South Korea, in the Philippines, in Australia, they're actually not there to protect anything. They're acting in two purposes. One is serve as tripwire. That's a term for the U.S. Troop deployment in South Korea. The idea of tripwire is if the North Korea were launched attack on South Korea, and then if that were to happen, and if the U.S. military personnel get caught in the way, that will be a cause for United States to enter the war. So these guys are literally human sacrifices, to serve as a justification to drag United States into a deeper war. And so that's one reason. The second reason for all these U.S. bases in the region, so all these other countries can serve as a missile sponge, so they can soak up all the Chinese missile barrages. So less will be directed to the U.S. Seventh Fleet. But
so
anyway,
it won't be the USS Gerald R. Ford getting sunk to the side, the Taiwan Strait.
Yes. So I mean, that logic is becoming increasingly obvious now to everyone. So witnessing what's happening to especially GCC countries in the Persian Gulf. Their economy is getting evaporated. Like the Strait Hormuz is blocked, and they're other not only the U.S. bases, but all the Amazon data centers are all getting lit up by Iranian drones and missiles. I mean, this is why the silver lining of the Iran conflict is actually less now. We have at a much reduced possibility of actual hot kinetic action in East Asia, because now it's obvious, I think, to most people now, if the United States cannot take on Iran, forget about China. I mean, like United States barely have any economic interaction with Iran. China is where 80% of the antibiotics come from for United States, and like this is it's I saw on Twitter, Tom Cotton issued he proposed some legislation that will ban like the Chinese drugs into United States. I'm like, you sure you want to cut off 80% of your antibiotic supply? You sure that was a good idea? But anyway, like Go ahead.
They don't. I don't think they think very much. Before we start getting into the Iran conflict, because I do want to touch on that, because that is a very, very important part of. I told the show the new geopolitical order, because I keep hearing people talk about like the way that Trump is allegedly going after the British banks, like the City of London and all that. But I feel like it's almost ancillary to the conversation of the pivot to Asia since like 2011, right? So I want to touch on Taiwan before we start moving into Iran again, because my understanding is Lai Ching-te, he's very, very much so willing to work with the US.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, he's like China calls him a warmonger, right? I believe there was a recent statement by the Chinese Foreign Ministry where they called him a warmonger and something else, which I think that's him just being a little hyperbolic, but it makes sense because he's more willing to take, like, Trump just did that whole, what was it, $13 billion in arms sales to Taiwan just a couple months ago. The KMT, I would like to kind of explore this a little bit more, because like they're independence minded, but they're more willing to work with China, if I understand that correctly. But it seems like Chang Li-Wun was more willing to work with China, like explicitly so. And like you said, she doesn't want Taiwan to be the Ukraine of Asia, which is basically what the US wants to do with it. And it's interesting that she's coming to the United States, because the United States, with their new national security strategy, which I don't think this is going to be implemented, because they said, I'm sure you read it. They said, hey, we're pivoting away from the Middle East. We're pivoting away from China. We're going to focus on the Western Hemisphere. Okay, well, then you fight a war with Iran. It looks like that, national security strategy is now null and void. So as far as like all that goes, do you think that like, when was the last time the KMT really had power? And when they did, were they willing to work with the US in like an explicit way? Kind of like the current leading party, the Democratic Progressive Party. Like they seem very willing to work with the US. Like once again, they're welcoming the US in essentially. What's the whole vibe here?
Yeah, the last time KMT was in power was more than a decade ago. This is why like there has been a lot change in Taiwan since then.
Sure.
Back then, Taiwan had a president, Ma Ying-jeou, who is also KMT chairman. He actually proposed further tighter economic integration with China. He proposed a free trade agreement. Now, this free trade agreement had a lot of support from the Taiwan businesses who wanted to do more business with mainland China, but this whole free trade pact was scattered by what my friend in Taiwan, Xiang Yu, called a color revolution by the sunflower movement. So a lot of Taiwan students, they stormed the Taiwan legislature. They occupied it. They occupied the Taiwan legislature, and it's called the sunflower movement. And that protest scattered the whole closer economic integration with mainland China. And as Xiang Yu pointed out, a lot of the student leaders of that movement were either getting funded or affiliated with all this NED, National Endowment for Democracy, which is basically a CIA cutout for instigating color revolutions. And the sunflower movement actually served as a template for the later Hong Kong protests in 2019.
Oh.
The people who, the Hong Kong billionaire tycoon Jimmy Lai, who is in jail right now, he actually went to the leaders of Taiwan who orchestrated the sunflower movement, tried to learn from them how to get everything working. So this there's many reasons Jimmy Lai is in jail, not just because Wall Street Journal called him the Rupert Murdoch of Asia.
If you ask anybody in the West, it's because he was a billionaire, and you can't be a billionaire in China. I'm like, something about this doesn't sound right, dude. I'm not buying this.
Yeah, because he ran a media empire act called Apple Daily, and his second man in command, Mark Simon, came from like a prominent CIA family. And it's very shady. And they also were photographed together with like the US consulate meeting with the U.S. consul in Hong Kong during the protest.
I'm sure those two were totally unrelated.
Yeah, this is all, and that Hong Kong protest actually got DPP, the current ruling party in Taiwan, reelected. Because at that time the DPP president Tsai Ing-wen was actually also very wobbly in popular support. At one point her popular support was in single digits, and then Hong Kong protests happened, and then they start this whole scaremongering campaign. So like, look at what happened to Hong Kong. If one country, two system were implemented here, what's happening in Hong Kong will be happening in Taiwan today. So vote for DPP, because DPP is a more vocally
they're the most independent minded.
The Taiwan independence is literally written in their party platform, but since they have taken over the power, they kind of backtrack a little bit, because they say, well, we don't need to declare independence because the Republic of China on Taiwan is already independent, so we don't have to declare independence anymore. But anyway, so both parties, KMT and DPP, they're basically both status quo parties. They're parties to maintain. But of these two, DPP is definitely more pro. I mean, they're more pliant, more U.S. pliant. Both parties are pro-U.S. Let's make no mistake. Okay. All political parties in Taiwan have to go pay a visit to AIT, the American Institute on Taiwan, which served as the de facto embassy on Taiwan after 1978, after U.S. and China normalized relationship and Washington switched the diplomatic recognition from the government on Taiwan to the government on Beijing. So, but the AIT, the head of AIT is like the American consul on Taiwan. He's a guy who actually calling the shots. So all the parties have ties more or less with the U.S. But KMT, they do have a little bit more independent streak. In the case that KMT, they started out, their official name, 中国国民党, which literally means Chinese Nationalist Party. They're a party that started in mainland China, right? Leading to the founding of the Republic of China. They were the defeated party in this Chinese Civil War in 1949. So when Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan, he took a lot of his people with him to Taiwan. So that's a background of KMT, and this is why KMT has always, at least nominally, been saying adhere to the one China principle. They always claim that they claim the jurisdiction over all of China, and they're the only legitimate government of China. That had been the official position for KMT for a long time. But the DPP, which arose in Taiwan in 1980s, while Taiwan was under martial law. So Taiwan was actually under martial law from 1947 to 1987. For the whole period of 40 years, Taiwan was under martial law. So during the time Taiwan was under martial law, Chiang Kai-shek's government basically killed. They target all oppositions, but they first killed off all the communists and all the native communists, all the suspected communist sympathizers. They all either got locked up or killed, and so that left the only opposition to KMT rule on Taiwan be this kind of liberal. From this liberal opposition. This is where the DPP come from. They were against the KMT dictatorship in Taiwan from 1947 to 1987. And this was a time when Chang Li-Wun, the current head of KMT, back then, she was actually part of the DPP. She was part of the opposition to the military dictatorship that was ruling Taiwan. But she switched when after Taiwan democratized, the election were held when the KMT allowed opposition party to form. This is how DPP came about in 1990s. What DPP realized then is to enable to distinguish themselves with the KMT when both parties are basically representing the neoliberal interests. In order to distinguish themselves with the ruling KMT back then, they had to come up with something different, and they decided to adopt the populist divide and conquer strategy because Taiwan demographically, 80%, like 85% of the people on Taiwan today, they have their families living on the island before 1949. So these people, they speak, what they call Taiwanese, but it's really a dialect of Fujian dialect, which is spoken across the Taiwan Strait in the other side of the Taiwan Strait. But they're different from the other 15% of the population who came with Chiang Kai-shek from mainland China in 1949, because they came from all over China, not just one specific province of Fujian, where traditionally have been the source of migration into Taiwan. So those people, they spoke all different dialects, and so KMT mandated Mandarin education for everyone. Like at that time, they forbidden people to spoke the Taiwanese dialect in school. You get slapped in school if the teacher hear you speaking the local lingua, and so this, of course, created a lot of resentment too, because a lot of people in Taiwan feel like, okay, finally the Japanese colonizer left, and then all these carpetbaggers from the mainland can take over, and they take over all the important position in the government. That was the original opposition to the KMT, because they're seen as this mainlander carpetbagger party. This is how, but DPP realized, hey, if we can exploit this division, this like Taiwan versus mainlander division, we will win, because demographic wise, we got majority, 85% of the population. So that's the tactics they pursue, and that it did work out for them, because now they're the ruling party. But Chang Li-Wun decided to leave DPP at that point, because she originally was in DPP to oppose the KMT dictatorship, the KMT ruling, but she saw that DPP was veering into this more populist kind of playing this ethnic divide rule, because she came from a mixed family. Her father came from the KMT military side that came from mainland China, but her mother was from Taiwan. So she has roots from both sides of the divide. So she was not, she was not for this kind of DPP policy of sowing ethnic division in Taiwan. So anyway, so this is, but KMT has always have its own little independent streak. Even Chiang Kai-shek, because Washington originally wanted Chiang Kai-shek to actually sever ties completely with mainland. Just, forget about trying to claim to represent all of China when you're Taiwan. Just declare independence. We will protect you. But Chiang Kai-shek refused that, because he still had pretensions of being ruler of all over China, and he's still at heart a Chinese nationalist. And so Taiwan independence is anathema to Chiang Kai-shek, and which he actually actively suppressed during his rule. And so this is kind of the difference between KMT and DPP. Both are pro-US, work with US, but KMT are not really like big on let's declare Taiwan independence, whereas the DPP, they're more obsequious. They're more obsequious to the U.S. interest, because they see that as the best possible route to get what they want. So those are the differences. But for China, they're open to work with anyone who is willing to talk. The problem with Lai Qingde is that so I was talking with another Taiwanese person, Angelica who I also used to
her. She's awesome. Yeah.
She also used to be the DPP supporter, a few years back, and she also recently changed her position. And she said, yeah, I'm like, wait, aren't you just always supporting girl bosses? Because back when Tsai Ing-wen was a leader of DPP, you supported Tsai Ing-wen, and now Zheng Li-Wen is the KMT chairwoman. You support Zheng Li-Wen. She's just like, well, okay, I now disagree with Tsai Ing-wen on many issues, but one thing that separates Tsai Ing-wen, the former president of Taiwan, versus Lai Ching-te, the current president, is that Tsai Ing-wen is a lot more politically savvy. She will not deliberately goad mainland China. She will say all those things, but she will only walk up to a certain line, and before she walks back that position, she will make sure she does not cross the red line to trigger a escalation of conflict. Whereas Lai Ching-te is a little bit more of a loose cannon. I mean, she lacks that political savviness, and so he's more for like open confrontation with mainland China, which make him a better candidate for Washington. Because for Washington's a current policy of being antagonist toward China. So this is kind of the complexity and nuances of the Taiwan politics today. But I think I'm fairly optimistic. Just I think especially given the current trends, a lot of people have realized United States is not a sure bet. It's not. The alliance with United States do not necessarily yield the expected benefits. Taiwan is one of the best customer for the U.S. military industrial complex, by the way. A lot of time when it's reported as like U.S. aid to Taiwan. No, those are not aid. Taiwan are purchasing those with real hard currencies. And unlike, say, Israel, that's the money that's just given to Israel.
I've heard you call it before the golden calf. Well, now that we're kind of through the Taiwan stuff, I do want to touch on the Iran stuff, because now this is what I'm really curious about as well. And this is related. Everybody had kept saying that Iran and Venezuela were both about getting energy from China. But when I looked this up, and I want your input on this as well, the most I could find is that maybe Iran and Venezuela gave China 20% of their oil. So that's a fifth of their energy, which once again, that's, China has tons of renewables and there's other forms of energy they have. So there's that. Who actually closing down the Strait of Hormuz actually really hurt was all the other countries in East Asia, Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, India, all the countries that the US wants to use against China. But China also has a 3-month stack of oil. So I'm sure they're not happy about it. But once again, the Strait of Hormuz is open for China. So, and then Venezuela is still selling small amounts of oil to China. So this whole deal where supposedly I got two pictures.
So a lot of people a lot of people are getting confused by kind of statistics. 90% of Iranian oil and Venezuelan oil were going to China before.
Right.
But
correct.
While that's 90% of Venezuelan and Iranian production, is actually a smaller fraction of what China actually imports.
Exactly.
We actually have data for that. Because of those oil sanctions, they're usually being those oils were being shipped on what's called the shadow fleet or the dark fleet. They travel to South China Sea and they get swap out the oil load on different tankers and then get remarketed, mostly rebranded as Malaysian oil. So if you actually look at the Chinese oil import, you're like the top 3 origin country is Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Malaysia. And you're like, Malaysia? Malaysia is an oil producing country, but it doesn't produce in that kind of quantity. And the Malaysian share of the China's oil import is about 13%. So that's about the extent of the Iranian and Venezuelan oil that were going to China, how much it will compose of China's take. So while it's 90% of Iranian production and 90% of Venezuelan production, it's only about 13% of China's own oil imports. right? And oil is a global commodity. You know, China buys less from Iran and Venezuela, it just means China buys more from elsewhere, which does not necessarily bode well for U.S. and U.S. ally, because that just means China entering the market is going to push the price even higher. That's how the oil market works. And so this is the whole reason U.S. have to have to lift sanction on Russian and Iranian oil, because they realize their allies are getting screwed, because especially their allies in East Asia, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, and India, they're heavily dependent on oil and gas coming from the Gulf. And India used to import a lot from Russia and then resell them at a premium to Europe. And then United States pressure India to stop that. And then they have to reverse their decision, because like India was panicking because suddenly they're getting cut off from the Gulf oil and gas. And China actually has took time to build up their own strategic oil reserve for the last 4 years, taking advantage of the historically low oil prices. So they had about anywhere between 1.2 to 1.5 billion barrels of oil stock up, which should last them, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And that they're not drawing down their strategic oil reserve, because there's still oil coming in, even from Iran at this point. So right now, even if they stop all oil import from every other country, their strategic oil reserve will last them 3 to 6 months. But right now they're still importing from Russia, from Africa, from even from Iran and Venezuela. So China is doing okay, even though they're paying higher prices than they used to be, but they're still getting their oil. So the whole idea that this is some kind of Trump 5-dimensional chess to choke off China's energy supply, I think this is just like some neocon think tanks, particularly I see a lot from Hudson Institute. They're just like the way to justify, kiss Trump's ass, basically. They're like, Trump has no strategy, man. This is the guy who started this war without even bother to fill up U.S.'s own strategic petroleum reserve. U.S. used to have a large strategic oil reserve, which was drawn down since the Biden years in order to calm the inflation fears and to win election. But before Trump embarked this war, he didn't even bother to refill it back up, because he thought this is going to be a short, sweet, just like the Venezuelan operation. I think the whole Venezuelan operation got to their head. They thought, we can do it.
I think you're right. Yeah. So someone had replied to me with this, and this is when I said, like, the whole idea that this is about China is ridiculous. So this guy says, Tom Sauer, I don't know this guy, but energy, sea lines of communication, the Panama Canal, which the U.S. still doesn't control, Venezuela, which they sort of control, but they're still selling oil, the Strait of Hormuz, which is controlled by Iran, they're still controlling Iran, the Straits of Malacca, Indonesia, South China Sea, Strait of Taiwan. Like all those, the only one that the U.S. really has down pat, you could maybe make an argument for Venezuela. And then they also shared this one with me, which is showing where all this goes. And like none of these are working in the favor of the U.S. right now. So I don't get the argument that this is about China. So go ahead.
By the way, this whole argument about choking China's energy supply, this had been extensively talked about by U.S. think tanks, by U.S. Navy, about Strait of Malacca, being that's the choking point. And so China has spent some serious money and investment over the last 2 decades try to diversify away from that. This is the whole logic of the Belt and Road Initiative, right? And this is why they're building gas and oil pipeline through Russia. And Russia is now China's largest provider of oil and gas, and they can always increase more imports from Russia, which that's a route that U.S. can't do nothing about. And a lot of people also forget China produce oil. China produce more oil than Iran. China is one of the world's top oil producers. It's just that China's demand is so huge that all that oil is being used domestically. and China is also have been moving into this massive push toward electrification of the country. All the high-speed rail in the country are running on electricity, and the electricity China can generate either from coal, wind, wind, solar, hydro, or nuclear. China is doing the largest build out of nuclear power plants right now. There's building bringing tons of hydro plants on power, and they're building a huge solar rollout throughout the country. So China currently is about 86% self-sufficient in primary energy production. So it only depends on, still 14% of China's energy come from abroad, and half of that is in terms of oil. There's some parts that you can replace, like jet fuel. You can't replace jet fuel. Which why China had put an export restriction, because China used to be largest exporter of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel because China has a large refining capacity. So even though China is a net importer of crude, it's a net exporter of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. But now China's like, okay, sorry, we're going to have to take care of our domestic producers. We're going to lock it down, which create a problem for countries like Australia, because Australia depend 32% of their jet fuel from China. That just got cut off.
So flights got a lot more expensive, more than likely.
Yes. And this is why Australian Prime Minister is traveling to Singapore, trying to secure their supply, because Singapore is their second largest supplier of jet fuel, because Singapore also has a large refining capability. But where does Singapore get its oil? Singapore does not produce oil. Singapore produces get most of its oil from the Gulf. They just refine it. It's just like China. They have a large refinery, so refine it, export it to the rest of the world. But China also put a export control on sulfuric acid, which is another huge basic components of like modern industrial economy, because China produces about 35% of the global supply of sulfuric acid. Now, sulfuric acid is and China because China sources 50% of sulfur from Persian Gulf. And so China says, okay, you know what? We're going to need all the sulfuric acid for ourselves. And sulfuric acid is used in fertilizers, copper mining, car batteries, semiconductor manufacturing. So it's like the basic building block of civilization. And this is the kind of the impact that people are going to feel all across the globe right now, like for fertilizers, urea, nitrogen, potassium. These, like nitrogen is and urea, they're all extracted from natural gas, and those are very important fertilizers that farmers need right now, because it's planting season. It's spring, it's planting season. They need to plant for the rest of the year. If they don't do it, guess what? We're going to have shortages near end of the year. And that's going to be a very serious problem. And also helium. Helium is also extracted from hydrocarbons, and helium is used in, again, advanced semiconductor manufacturing, which Taiwan is relying on. Taiwan resource most of the helium from the Persian Gulf in order for TSMC to make their advanced chips, which help them to make advanced AI chips for NVIDIA. So, forget the AI bubble, right? I mean, like the whole AI bubble premise on them building tons of data centers, and those data center host tons of AI chips. Well, guess what? You're not getting your chips because Taiwan is not getting its helium supply.
Okay, so I'm glad that we're touching on that. We kind of worked our way back to Taiwan as well here, because I really wanted to hit on this as well, because the Iran and Taiwan kind of situation here, I want to know how closely linked they are, because of course, what's the first thing? Anything that happens all over the globe, what's the first thing that people say? China's going to go after Taiwan now. Like, oh, the US is busy over here. China's going Ukraine. China's going to go after Taiwan. Soon as Israel. Everybody always plays this up. Like, you see people putting firm dates on this. I'm like, it's not going to happen. So I'm really curious about if Iran is now only exporting to what they consider their allies, and then the GCC countries are also probably looking at the US now and thinking like, man, you're like now telling us we have to ration interceptors because you don't have enough to defend us from a war you started without consulting us. What the hell does this mean? And then Taiwan also, you say Lai Ching-te is relatively unpopular, but if they have to pay more for energy, he's probably even less popular now. So if you can't get all these semiconductors because Taiwan is struggling for energy and they really need a little bit more stability with China because China can provide them all this stuff, but Iran is now being, kind of forced closer to China, and the GCC countries are now more willing to work with China, more than likely, at least this is my assumption, this last part. Does this make it more likely that the KMT wins the midterms and then let's say wins 2028? And I know this also depends on, them being able to cooperate with the TPP. What do you think this all looks like? Like, how do you think as I titled the show, the new geopolitical order looks, since it does seem like this whole war in Iran, despite people saying this about China, it seems like it's actually, well, maybe they're right, because it benefited China, at least by the way that I'm looking at it, like a lot.
Oh, definitely. I mean, China is looking to be like this rock of stability right now. A lot of the capital are looking for capital flight from the GCC, and guess where they will go? They will go to East Asia. They will go to China. They will go to Southeast Asia, and lot of that movement is already underway as we speak. There's report of I think it was UAE. They're looking to consolidate their funds in their coordinate their investment in China, because if you look at the bond yields, the Chinese bond yield is stable while the bond yield is creeping up for every other country, particularly United States. That means people have the smart money have more trust in the Chinese government at this point as maintainer of stability and peace. And also that goes for Taiwan. The helium issue. I made a joke. I mean, like, Taiwan can solve their helium supply, with a very neat trick, because China have no problem of getting natural gas from Russia and from Central Asia. They have the pipeline for it, so they have their helium. And but anyway, so I think it does provide the economic rationale for some sort of accommodation between Taiwan and mainland China. And this is why the people who talk about Trump's five-dimensional chance to constrain China's energy supply. Well, look at how brilliantly that turned out. I think it doesn't mean that's not how Trump himself think about it, though. I mean, because there's a reason he delayed his China trip. Originally, his China trip was scheduled, according to the White House, was scheduled to end of March and early April. Would have already wrapped up by now, but he had to say, "Oh, we have to delay that to May." By the way, Chinese government have never officially confirmed those dates, right? So the dates only come from the Trump administration.
just like the alleged letter to Xi Jinping about not sending weapons to Iran.
Yes. So unless I see the official Chinese confirmation, it's not really official, right? Trump administration has no credibility at this point. Same thing like when Scott Bessent said China pledged to buy like 250 billion tons of soybeans or whatever, and you read the Chinese press readout, they didn't say none of that. Scott Bessent just made that up, and so we have to if. So far, only the official release from the Chinese government foreign ministry is that China is working through with their American counterparts on the dates of President Trump's incoming visit. So, in other words, TBD. But the whole reason that Trump had to delay his supposed visit to China was because he would have shown up in Beijing with a very weak hand, right? I mean, the idea is he will go to Beijing with the chokehold on Venezuela and Iran and say, "Ha, I got you, China, by the balls." But now he's going to Beijing, say, "I'm doing a blockade on the Iranian blockade on Strait of Hormuz." People are looking at, Xi Jinping will look at him like he's a fool. And so this is why I think it was being delayed till middle of the next month. But whether that happens, I think a lot depends on how this ceasefire will pan out, which will run out Wednesday, and which there has been further escalation. Go ahead.
There was reports. I know you got to go here in a few minutes, but there was a report that they bombed that Iran had hit a U.S. vessel. So this sounds like an Israeli ceasefire where one side ceases and the other side fire, or one side ceases, Israel fires. It kind of seems like one of those where like no Israeli ceasefire is actually genuine on their side. And of course, now they've sent Kushner and Witkoff back to negotiate with Iran. And what's happened the last two times? They sent those two little certain ethnicity men over there to negotiate. They get attacked.
Kushner is the guy who architected the whole Abraham Accord deal, right? I mean, like, this is a guy who now created this whole map for Middle East for the Greater Israel Project, and you're sending him to negotiate with Iran, right? I mean, which I guess it makes sense. I mean, this is a war for Israel, so let the guy who negotiate Israel's interests with Iran. But yeah, there's a whole series of escalation lately with United States supposedly fired on an Iranian cargo ship and seizing control of it. This is very typical Trump type of, that's how his negotiation tactic, right? So it's like creating such an unreasonable demand to force the other side to come down. But the problem is people know his antics by now. Like you can't keep on doing that. And right now, that's why Iran said, "Okay, we're closing down the Strait of Hormuz again." After a brief agreement before the weekend that they would open the Strait of Hormuz. Like, that was off ramp the offer to Trump, but Trump had to come out with his crazy tweets, claim that Iran surrendered and and they're gonna give up their enriched uranium. And Iran's like, no, we didn't say that. We're gonna close down the Strait of Hormuz again. This whole thing could drag on longer than people expected, which is not going to be good for the world. Like I said, we're going to face some serious inflationary pressures. If the war drags along longer, this is going to be worse than the oil shock in the 1970s, which led to the decades of stagflation. But it will be good for, guess what? It will be good for China's EV push. Chinese electric car is going to be very popular now that oil price is shooting up. So yeah, another great job for Trump's 5D strategy to contain China.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully get some BYDs over here in Pennsylvania. I know last time we talked a little bit about EVs, and EVs from domestic manufacturers. I love the General Motors ones, but they're so goddamn expensive. Carl, I know you got to go. I really, really appreciate it, and I hope we could do another one again sometime soon, maybe after Trump's trip to Beijing. If that, once again, TBD. Where can everybody find you? And if you want me to send you all this, I will after probably tomorrow or something like that. So go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, I'm a prolific shit poster on X, so I post under handle Carl Zha, just my name, and I also have I have a YouTube channel also under Carl Zha. I also have a Patreon where I post audio podcasts where I focus more on Chinese history. I'm doing a chronological telling of Chinese history from the very beginning. Right now, I'm up to the year 224 BC, so just a couple years before unification under the first emperor. So as things are getting exciting, if that's your cup of tea, follow me, give me a subscribe on Patreon for Silk and Steel podcast, and it's always a pleasure to come back to your show, Kyle. Anytime. I love to talk.
For sure. All right, Carl. We'll wrap her up there. I appreciate your time, man. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. And until next Sunday, take care, everyone.
Bye bye.
See ya.